Part 1. The Great Hall on Zenther Prime stretched higher than most species could see without enhancement. Crystal pillars rose toward a ceiling that shifted colors with the light of 3 suns. Today, representatives from across the galaxy gathered for something that happened only once every 1,000 years. The Millennial Council was a tradition older than most civilizations. Each species brought their greatest achievement to share with all the others. Ambassador Chen Wei stood near the back of the human delegation. He was a small man with gray hair and tired eyes. He wore the simple blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. Around him, other species prepared their presentations with obvious excitement. The Valkyrie had brought projection equipment that bent light in impossible ways. The Thros carried sealed containers that hummed with biological energy. The Kree, ancient and wise, had scrolls that seemed to whisper secrets even from across the room. Chen Wei felt the weight of the data chip in his pocket. He had carried it from Earth. He had been told never to use it. The presentations began with the younger species. A race of crystalline beings showed how they could sing structures into existence. A water-based civilization demonstrated their ability to compute using living oceans. Each achievement brought applause and wonder from the assembled crowd. The sharing of knowledge was sacred here. It was how the galaxy grew stronger together. The Valkyrie presented after the lunch period. Their matriarch, a being of shifting silver light, stepped onto the central platform. She touched her control device and space itself folded. The audience gasped as they watched distant galaxies appear close enough to touch, then fold away again. "We give this to all species," the matriarch said. "So travel becomes easier. So no one remains isolated." The Thros came next. Their speaker was a mass of tentacles and intelligent flesh that reformed itself as it spoke. "We have conquered death itself," it announced. The containers opened to show creatures that had been dead, now alive again. Not resurrected or copied, but truly brought back from nothing. "We share this so grief may end throughout the stars." The Kree floated to the platform, so old that its body seemed more spirit than matter. It unrolled scrolls covered in mathematics that hurt to look at directly. "We have mapped consciousness," it said in a voice like wind through ancient trees. "We understand now what thinking is, what awareness means. We offer this knowledge freely." Each presentation was met with gratitude and celebration. Species exchanged contacts and began planning collaborations. This was what the Millennial Council was for. This was what lifted all species higher. Then came Earth's turn. Chen Wei walked slowly to the platform. He could feel thousands of eyes on him. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community. Only 300 years since first contact. Most species were curious what humanity would share. They had proven creative and adaptable. Their entertainment was popular. Their diplomatic skills were respected. What achievement would they offer? Chen Wei stood in the center of the platform. He looked out at the waiting faces, the eager expressions, the anticipation. He took a deep breath. "The human delegation respectfully requests to pass," he said. Silence fell across the hall. It was not the comfortable silence of contemplation. It was the shocked silence of confusion. Chen Wei watched as species turned to each other, trying to understand if they had heard correctly. The Valkyrie matriarch's light flickered in what might have been surprise. "Ambassador Chen Wei," she said carefully. "Perhaps there is a translation error. You wish to present later in the schedule?" "No, matriarch," Chen Wei replied. His voice was steady but quiet. "We request to pass entirely. We have no achievement to share at this time." The hall erupted. Delegates stood and spoke over each other. The Thros speaker's tentacles writhed in agitation. A representative from the Core Collective, a hive mind species, broadcast confusion so strong that empaths in the audience clutched their heads. "Impossible," declared a Kree scholar. In 10,000 years of millennial councils, no species has ever refused to share. It violates the sacred purpose of this gathering. Are humans primitive after all? Asked the Valkyrie diplomat. Do they have nothing worth sharing? Chen Wei waited for the noise to quiet. The matriarch had to pulse her light in a pattern that demanded silence. When the hall finally settled, Chen Wei spoke again. We are not primitive, he said. We have made achievements, discoveries, advancements that would be considered significant by any measure. But we have collectively decided, as a species, that some knowledge is a burden. Some discoveries carry a weight we choose not to place on others. That is not your choice to make, the Thross speaker said, its voice bubbling with frustration. Knowledge belongs to all. The whole purpose of this council is to share so the galaxy benefits. We understand, Chen Wei said, and we accept whatever judgment you make about our refusal. But our answer remains the same. There are things humanity has learned that we will not teach. The matriarch moved closer to the platform. Her light dimmed to a soft glow. Ambassador, you must understand how this appears. You ask us to trust that humanity knows better than the council itself, that you have wisdom we lack. This is concerning. Chen Wei met her gaze, or what served as a gaze for a being of light. We do not claim wisdom, matriarch, only experience. And the burden of that experience is ours to carry alone. The council session ended in chaos. Delegates argued about what to do. Some demanded humanity be censured. Others were simply confused. A few, the oldest and wisest, looked at the human delegation with something new in their eyes. Something that might have been concerned on as Chen Wei left the hall. He touched the data chip still in his pocket. Inside it was everything. The weapon designs, the theories, the terrible mathematics that humanity had learned. Knowledge that could end worlds or save them. Knowledge that changed anyone who possessed it. He had done what Earth asked. He had kept a secret, but as he boarded the shuttle back to the human quarters, he wondered how long that secret could last, and whether keeping it was truly mercy or just delaying the inevitable. Part 2. The news of humanity's refusal spread through the galaxy faster than light. On every civilized world, people talked about the humans who would not share their knowledge. Some thought it was arrogance. Others thought it was fear. A few wondered if humanity was hiding something dangerous. 3 cycles passed after the council gathering. Human trade continued as normal. Human diplomats attended meetings and negotiations. But everywhere they went, the question followed them like a shadow. What were they hiding? The Thross were the first to investigate seriously. Their intelligence networks were biological, living things that could slip through security systems without being detected. They penetrated Earth's databases and found files encrypted beyond anything they had seen before. The files were marked with warnings in every human language and dozens of alien ones too. Do not open. Do not copy. Do not transmit. Authorized personnel only under Protocol 7. Protocol 7. No one knew what that meant. The Thross tried to break the encryption, but their best systems burned out trying. Whatever humans were protecting, they were protecting it well. The Valkyrie took a different approach. They used their dimensional technology to observe human military facilities from folded space. What they saw troubled them. Weapons that their sensors could not properly read. Research stations built in the empty spaces between stars. Ships that seemed to phase in and out of normal reality. The Valkyrie matriarch called an emergency session with her advisors. They are more advanced than we thought, one advisor said. Perhaps more advanced than us. That is not what troubles me, the matriarch replied. What troubles me is that they are hiding it. A species only hides power when they fear what it might do. The Cree-seers decided to look into humanity's future. They were famous for their prophecy. their ability to see the paths that lay ahead for any species. 3 seers entered their meditation chamber and reached forward through time, seeking to understand what humanity would become. All 3 collapsed. When they recovered days later, they refused to speak of what they had seen. The High Seer himself came to question them. "What did you see?" he demanded. "What future does humanity have?" The youngest seer, still shaking, said only this: "They survive. They always survive." But the cost? She could not finish the sentence. The High Seer never shared what the seers had told him privately. But after that day, he stopped calling for humanity to share their knowledge. When other Kree asked why, he said, "Some paths are walked alone for good reason." 5 more cycles passed. The mystery of humanity deepened. Some species began to fear them. Trade decreased slightly. Human diplomats noticed the change in how others treated them. Friendly conversations became formal. Invitations to cultural events came less frequently. The galaxy was growing suspicious. Ambassador Chen Wei, now retired, watched from Earth as the situation deteriorated. He had known this would happen. Secrets always created fear. But the alternative was worse. He remembered the debates among human leaders before the Millennial Council. The arguments that lasted months. "We should share," some had said. "The galaxy deserves to know what is possible." "And then what?" Others replied. "Every species begins building the same weapons we built. The galaxy becomes an armed camp where everyone knows how to end everyone else." In the end, Earth's government had voted to keep the secret. It was not unanimous. Many humans disagreed with the decision, but the majority believed that some knowledge was too dangerous to spread. Chen Wei understood both sides. He also understood that keeping secrets from the galaxy could not last forever. The crisis came without warning. Ships appeared at the edge of the Orion Arm. They were not ships in the normal sense. They were holes in space, wounds in reality itself. They consumed everything they touched. Matter, energy, even light disappeared into them. The species near the Orion Arm sent distress calls, then went silent. The Galactic Council mobilized its defense fleets. The Valkyrie sent their most advanced warships. The Thros deployed biological weapons that had never failed before. The Kree provided tactical predictions to guide the battle. Nothing worked. The things that came to be called the Devourers moved through space like cancer through flesh. Every weapon fired at them either disappeared or made them stronger. The Valkyrie's dimensional technology accidentally opened more holes when they tried to fold space near the Devourers. The Thros biological weapons were consumed, and their energy added to the Devourers' mass. Worlds fell. Billions died. Refugees flooded toward the core systems in ships packed beyond capacity. The Devourers followed, slow but unstoppable. The Council met in emergency session. Military commanders from every major species presented their analysis. The conclusion was the same from all of them. Conventional warfare would not work. These things existed in states of matter that most species barely understood. They were not just aliens from another place. They were invaders from another type of existence entirely. "We need new weapons," the Thros commander said. "New tactics. New understanding. We need time to research," added a Valkyrie admiral. "Time to study them and develop countermeasures." "We do not have time," the Kree High Seer said quietly. "In 40 cycles, they will reach the core worlds. In 60 cycles, half the galaxy will be consumed. I have seen this." Silence fell over the chamber. The assembled leaders knew what the High Seer's prophecies meant. If he had seen this future, it was almost certain to happen unless something changed dramatically. The matriarch of the Valkyrie stood. Her light was dim, showing her distress. "Then we must change something," she said. "We must do what we have not done before." She turned to look at the human delegation. We must ask humanity for help. Ambassador Torres, Chen Wei's successor, had been expecting this. She was younger than Chen Wei, but had the same tired eyes. She had seen the classified files. She knew what humanity had kept hidden. "Matriarch," she said carefully, "you may not want what we can offer." "We are dying," the thrust commander said bluntly. "Millions every day. We will take any help available." Other voices joined in agreement. The desperation in the chamber was thick enough to feel. These were species facing extinction. They were willing to accept anything that might save them. Torres looked at her aide, who handed her a communication device. She entered a code that connected directly to Earth's Central Command. The conversation was brief and private. When she finished, her face was even more tired than before. "The human government has authorized me to make a formal disclosure," she said. "But first, you must understand something. What we have kept secret is not just powerful technology. It is a way of thinking, a philosophy of survival that changes anyone who truly understands it. Once we show you, you cannot unsee it. The galaxy will be different forever." "Tell us," the matriarch said. "No," Torres replied. "I will show you. The Council demands that humanity deploy our weapons against the Devourers. We will comply. But you should know that these weapons were never built for creatures like the Devourers. We built them for something else. We built them for ourselves." She pressed another button on her device. Across the galaxy, human military forces received the same message simultaneously. 4 words that every human soldier had hoped never to hear. "Activate Dead Sun Protocol." The council members who understood human language felt a chill at those words. Dead Sun. Even the name carried weight. What kind of species named their weapons after the death of their own star? "Our fleets will engage the Devourers within 3 cycles," Torres said. "You will see what we can do. And then you will understand why we never wanted to share this knowledge." She gathered her materials and stood. "I suggest you watch carefully. Pay attention not just to whether we win, but to how we win. That will tell you everything you need to know about what humanity has become." As the human delegation left the chamber, the other species sat in worried silence. They had asked for humanity's help. Now they would get it. But none of them were sure anymore if that was truly what they wanted. The human fleet arrived at the Devourer breached 3 cycles later. 200 ships, not a large force by galactic standards. The Council had sent observers from every major species to watch. They needed to see if humanity's secret weapons could actually work. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo commanded the fleet from the Dreadnought. Necessary evil. The name had caused controversy when the ship was commissioned. Now it seemed appropriate. She sat in her command chair and looked at the view screen showing the Devourers. They were tears in space, wounds that bled darkness. Her sensors screamed warnings about impossible energy readings and violations of physics. "All ships report ready," her tactical officer said. "Weapon systems armed. Protocol 7 authentication confirmed. Begin recording and transmission to Council observers," Okonkwo ordered. They wanted to see this. "We will show them everything." On the observation station 50 light seconds away, representatives from the Council species gathered around displays. The Volcari matriarch was there in person. The Thros had sent their military coordinator. Even the Kree High Seer had come, though he looked like he might collapse at any moment. "What kind of weapons are those?" a Thros analyst asked, studying the sensor feeds from the human ships. "I cannot identify the energy signatures." "Because they should not exist," whispered a Kree technician. "Those readings suggest—" "No, that cannot be right." The human fleet moved into formation. It was not a standard battle formation. The ships arranged themselves in a pattern that looked almost ceremonial, like they were preparing for a ritual instead of a fight. Admiral Okonkwo took a deep breath. Fire entropy lances. The first weapons activated. They were beams, but not lasers or particle weapons. They were streams of weaponized entropy, accelerated heat death concentrated into a single point. Where they touched the devourers, reality itself aged. Space grew old and brittle. The tiers in space began to close, not from being destroyed, but from simply reaching the end of their existence. On the observation station, every species fell silent. The Valkyrie matriarch's light flickered in what might have been horror. "That is not possible," she said. "They are weaponizing thermodynamics. They are attacking with the end of time itself." "Deploy causality bombs," Okonkwo ordered next. Small devices launched from the human ships. They looked harmless until they detonated. When they did, cause and effect broke down. The devourers that had been advancing suddenly were not advancing. The space they occupied forgot they had ever been there. Events unhappened in spreading waves of temporal nonsense. A Kree observer began to weep. "They are breaking the arrow of time," he said. "They are making weapons from the fundamental structure of reality. But the worst was yet to come." "Activate consciousness extractors," Okonkwo said quietly. She hated this weapon most of all. It had been built by humans who understood that suffering itself could be weaponized. That pain, fear, and despair were forms of information that could be concentrated and directed. The devices activated. The devourers, things that had seemed unstoppable and perhaps mindless, suddenly recoiled. They moved away from the human fleet in what could only be described as terror. Whatever the consciousness extractors did, it affected even beings from outside normal reality. "They are weaponizing suffering itself," the thrust coordinator said, its tentacles trembling. "They have taken the worst thing any being can experience and made it into ammunition." The human fleet pressed forward. More weapons activated, each one breaking another fundamental rule of how warfare was supposed to work. Quantum uncertainty bombs that made matter forget what it was supposed to be. Void generators that created bubbles of absolute nothing, not empty space, but the absence of space itself. Reality anchors that forced the devourers to exist fully in normal dimensions, where they could be destroyed by conventional means. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the devourers were retreating. The advance that had seemed unstoppable was broken. The tiers in space were sealing. "Final phase," Okonkwo ordered. "Deploy the finality engine." This was the weapon that had taken humanity a century to build. A device that could reach back through probability and causality to change what was possible. It did not just destroy the devourers. It made their invasion less likely to have succeeded. It erased the paths they had taken to enter this dimension from the web of probability that governed reality. When the finality engine activated, the observers' instruments went insane. The devourers did not just retreat or die. They were retroactively prevented from having ever fully entered this dimension. The damage they had caused remained. The worlds they had destroyed were still gone. But the invasion itself became a thing that almost happened instead of something that did happen. The human fleet powered down their weapons and began the journey home. Behind them, space slowly repaired itself where the breach had been. On the observation station, no one spoke for a long time. They had watched humanity save the galaxy. They had also watched humanity demonstrate weapons that should never exist. Weapons built from concepts that most species considered impossible or unthinkable. Finally, the Valkyrie matriarch found her voice. "How?" she asked. "How did humanity develop such things?" Ambassador Torres, who had been watching with the observers, stepped forward. Her face showed no pride in the victory, only sadness. "That is the question, is it not? The Council wants to know how we build weapons that break the rules of reality itself. How we learn to weaponize entropy and causality and consciousness." She activated a holographic display. It showed Earth's history, but not the version that humanity usually shared with other species. This was the classified history, the one kept locked in the deepest archives. We did not build these weapons for the Devourers, Torres said. We built them for ourselves, for each other. During our worst wars, our darkest times, we kept escalating. Non-nuclear weapons were not enough. Biological weapons were not enough. We kept pushing, kept discovering new ways to destroy each other. Not because we were fighting aliens or dimensional invaders, because we were fighting ourselves. The display showed wars that had been erased from public history. Conflicts where weapons were used that killed not just bodies but souls. Where entire regions of Earth had to be quarantined not because of radiation, but because of weaponized concepts that made reality unstable. We almost destroyed ourselves dozens of times, Torres continued. Each time we survived by developing better weapons. More terrible weapons. Weapons that could counter the last terrible weapon someone else had built. We became very, very good at finding new ways to end existence itself. She paused, letting that sink in. Eventually, we realized what we were becoming. We looked at ourselves and saw a species that had perfected destruction. That understood death and ending better than we understood life and creation. So we made a choice. We would keep the weapons, keep the knowledge, but we would use it only as a last resort. And we would never, ever teach it to anyone else. The Thros coordinator spoke up, its voice trembling. But you have shown us now. We have seen what is possible. We have sensor readings, battle recordings. Other species will begin to theorize, to experiment. You cannot put this knowledge back in the box. No, Torres agreed. We cannot. That is why this is the story humanity never wanted to tell. Because once you know what is possible, once you understand that reality itself can be a weapon, you cannot unknow it. The innocence of the galaxy dies today. The Kree High Seer moved forward. He looked older than before, if such a thing were possible. I saw this, he said. In my vision when I looked at humanity's future, I saw weapons that should not exist. I saw a species that became death itself in order to survive. And I saw what would happen if that knowledge spread. What did you see? The matriarch asked. I saw every species in the galaxy eventually facing a choice, the High Seer said. Develop these weapons or remain vulnerable to those who do. I saw an arms race, not of guns and ships, but of fundamental forces. I saw a galaxy where everyone knows how to end everything, and the only thing preventing annihilation is the hope that no one will actually do it. Torres nodded slowly. That is why we kept it secret. That is why we refused to share at the Millennial Council. We knew that saving you from the Devourers would mean condemning you to this knowledge. And now that choice has been made. The galaxy is saved, but it can never go back to what it was before. She looked around at all the species represented there. We are sorry. We are sorry that you had to see this. Sorry that you now know what is possible. Sorry that we have introduced you to weapons built from the fundamental forces of reality. But you demanded our help, and this is what our help looks like. The observation station remained silent for a long time after that. Outside the windows, the human fleet was disappearing into the distance, heading back to Earth. They had won the battle. They had saved billions of lives, but everyone watching knew that the price of that victory was innocence. The galaxy now knew that ultimate weapons existed. That reality itself could be unmade. That there was a species out there that had learned these things by nearly destroying themselves over and over again. The age of peace and shared knowledge was over. Something new was beginning, and no one was sure if it would be better or worse than what came before. The Galactic Council reconvened 30 cycles, after humanity's victory over the Devourers. The Great Hall on Zenther Prime had not changed, but everything else had. The atmosphere was different now. Where there had once been trust and openness, there was now suspicion and fear. The debate began immediately. A coalition of younger species demanded that humanity be quarantined. "They are too dangerous," declared a representative from the Zinth Collective. "They possess weapons that break the laws of reality. They must be contained." "They saved us," countered a Velkari diplomat. "Without their intervention, we would all be dead. How can we repay salvation with imprisonment?" "They nearly destroyed themselves with these weapons," the Zinth representative argued back. "What happens when they decide we are a threat? What happens when some human leader chooses to use these weapons on us?" Ambassador Torres sat quietly through the arguments. She had expected this. Fear was a natural response to what the galaxy had witnessed. She waited until the matriarch called for her to speak. "We understand your concerns," Torres said, standing before the council. "We have lived with these fears for centuries. Every human knows what our species is capable of. We teach it in our schools. We memorialize it in our monuments. We never forget what we became in our darkest times." She activated a display showing Earth. "Our homeworld has museums dedicated to the weapons we built. Memorials to the people who died because we could not stop escalating. We remember because forgetting would be the first step toward repeating those mistakes." "That is not enough," said the Thros coordinator. "Memory is not prevention. What stops you from using these weapons now that we know you have them?" "The same thing that stopped us before you knew," Torres replied. "We do not want to use them. We never wanted to build them. These weapons exist because we were forced to develop them to survive ourselves. Now they exist, and we cannot unmake them. But we can choose not to use them except when there is no other option." The debate continued for days. Various proposals were discussed. Some species wanted humanity's weapons destroyed. Others wanted them placed under council control. A few wanted humanity expelled from the galactic community entirely. The Kree Seer finally ended the debate with a simple statement. "None of this matters," he said. "The knowledge exists. Humanity could destroy their weapons, share their designs, or lock them away forever. It would change nothing. Every major species in this galaxy is already beginning research based on what they observed in the battle." Silence fell over the chamber. Everyone knew it was true. The Thros had already published 3 papers on weaponized entropy theory. The Velkari were running simulations on causality manipulation. Smaller species were pooling resources to study quantum uncertainty weapons. The arms race had already begun. "Then we are doomed," said a young delegate from a peaceful species. "If everyone develops these weapons, eventually someone will use them. One war, one conflict, and entire star systems could be erased." "Perhaps," the High Seer said. "But perhaps not. That future is not yet written. What happens next depends on choices we have not yet made." Ambassador Torres stepped forward again. "Humanity has a proposal," she said. "We cannot unmake what has been learned. We cannot force species to stop researching these weapons. But we can offer something else. Something we should have offered from the beginning." She transmitted a document to all council members. "We propose the establishment of the Archive of Last Resort, a facility where humanity will share the full extent of our knowledge, but only under specific conditions. Any species that faces an existential crisis, any threat that cannot be solved through conventional means, can access the archive. But they must exhaust all other options first. And they must understand that once they take this knowledge, they become what we are. Guardians of weapons that should never have been created." The proposal sparked new debates. Some species supported it immediately. Others were suspicious. The Velkari matriarch studied the document carefully before speaking. "This archive," she said. "Who controls access? Who decides when a crisis is severe enough? A council of representatives from every major species, Torres answered. Including humanity, but not controlled by humanity alone. We do not want this responsibility only for ourselves. We want to share the burden. And if a species abuses this access, ask the Thros coordinator. If they take the knowledge and use it for conquest rather than defense, Torres's expression became hard. Then humanity will stop them. That is another thing we offer. We will be the watchdog, the guardian against misuse. If someone takes weapons from the archive and uses them wrongly, they will face the species that perfected those weapons. We will be both the teacher and the enforcer. It was a heavy offer. It meant humanity would position itself as the ultimate authority on weapons of mass destruction. Some species saw it as humanity taking too much power. Others saw it as humanity accepting a terrible burden that no one else wanted. The vote took 3 days. In the end, the Archive of Last Resort was approved by a narrow margin. Its location would be on a dead world at the edge of the galaxy, far from any inhabited systems. Its entrance would bear warnings in every known language. Its guardians would be volunteers from multiple species, but humanity would train them all. 5 years later, the archive opened. Ambassador Torres, now retired like Chen Wei before her, attended the ceremony. The entrance was a simple doorway in a building of dark stone. Above it, carved in letters 10 meters high, was a message that Torres herself had written. Beyond this door lies the power to end anything. Consider carefully whether your problem is worth becoming us. Torres stood with Chen Wei, who had lived to see this day. Both of them looked tired, older than their years. They watched as the first set of guardians took their post at the entrance. Do you think it will work? Chen Wei asked quietly. I think it is better than the alternative, Torres replied. At least now there is a process. A barrier between species and the weapons. Before, everyone was just rushing to develop these things on their own. Some still are, Chen Wei noted. The Thros have made progress on consciousness weapons. The Valkyrie are close to building their own causality bombs. Yes, Torres agreed. We cannot stop that. The knowledge exists now. But maybe, just maybe, having the archive will make some species pause. Make them think about whether they really need these weapons. Make them remember what we had to become to create them. Over the following centuries, the archive was accessed 7 times. Each time, a species faced genuine extinction and had exhausted all other options. Each time, they emerged with the knowledge they needed and the burden that came with it. Each time, the galaxy became a little less innocent and a little more like humanity. But there were also species that came to the archive's entrance and turned away. Species that decided their problem was not worth the price. Species that found other solutions, sometimes at great cost. Rather than walking the path humanity had walked, the Zinth Collective faced a plague that threatened their entire civilization. They came to the archive, ready to access biological weapons that could sterilize infected worlds. But at the entrance, they paused. They read the warning. They spoke with the Guardians, heard stories of what humanity had lost when they built such weapons. The Zinth left without entering and instead spent 50 years developing a cure through conventional research. Billions died, but their civilization survived without becoming weapons builders. The Core Collective, a hive mind, faced internal dissolution when a virus attacked their shared consciousness. They could have accessed weapons that attacked consciousness itself. Instead, they chose fragmentation, breaking into smaller hive groups that could survive independently. It was painful and diminished them, but they remained who they were. Not every species made such choices. Some entered the archive and emerged changed, joining humanity as guardians of terrible knowledge. The galaxy became divided between species who knew how to break reality and species who had chosen not to learn. Wars still happened. Conflicts still arose. But the wars fought with archive weapons were mercifully rare. The species that possessed such weapons knew what they meant. They knew the cost. They remembered humanity's history and did not wish to repeat it. Ambassador Torres lived to be very old. In her final years, she returned to Earth and spent time at the museums of human warfare. She looked at displays showing the weapons that nearly destroyed humanity, the escalations that almost ended their species, the terrible genius that went into devices built for mutual annihilation. A young student approached her once during these visits. "Ambassador Torres?" The student asked nervously. "I am writing a paper about the Devourer War, about how humanity saved the galaxy. Can I ask you a question?" "Of course," Torres said. "Do you think it was worth it? Revealing our weapons? Ending the galaxy's innocence? Was saving them worth changing them?" Torres was quiet for a long moment. "Every day I ask myself that question," she finally said. "And every day I do not have a good answer. We saved billions of lives. That is real. That matters. But we also taught the galaxy things it can never unlearn. We showed them the darkest paths that intelligence can walk." She looked at the young student. "But I will tell you what I believe. I believe that knowledge, even terrible knowledge, is better than ignorance. The galaxy was innocent before, yes. But innocence is not the same as wisdom. Now species make choices, knowing the full consequences. They see the path humanity walked and can choose whether to follow it or find another way. That is worth something. But we lost something too," the student said. "The trust, the openness, the feeling that we were all working together toward a better future." "Yes," Torres agreed. "We lost that. Or rather, we grew beyond it. The galaxy is not a place of children anymore, sharing toys and discoveries. It is a place of adults, making hard choices, bearing heavy responsibilities. That is what we gave them along with the weapons. The burden of adulthood." Torres died peacefully in her sleep 5 years later. At her funeral, representatives from hundreds of species attended. Even the Velkari matriarch came, ancient now and dimming. They gathered not just to mourn a diplomat, but to remember what she represented. The hard choices, the terrible knowledge, the burden of being the species that knew too much. The archive of last resort still stands at the edge of the galaxy. Its entrance still bears the warning Torres wrote. Its guardians still watch over weapons that can unmake reality. And humanity still carries the responsibility of being the species that nearly destroyed itself and learned from it. Sometimes, late at night on Earth, people look up at the stars and remember what humanity was before the weapons, before the knowledge, before they became the guardians of destruction. They remember and they mourn for that innocence, but they also remember the billions they saved. The species still alive because humanity shared the terrible knowledge they never wanted to possess. The galaxy that continues, changed, but surviving died. It was the story humanity never wanted to tell. But in the end, it was a story that had to be told. Because sometimes salvation comes not from heroes with clean hands, but from those who have walked through darkness and learned to carry the weight of what they found there died, and in that weight, that burden, that terrible knowledge, humanity found something unexpected. Not pride, never pride, but purpose. The purpose of being the ones who knew the worst, who had done the worst, and who could stand guard to make sure that worst was never repeated. Unless absolutely necessary. It was not the role they wanted, but it was the role the galaxy needed. And so humanity carried it forward into an uncertain future where innocence was gone, but wisdom, hard-earned and blood-bought, remained.